Hello and welcome to the J Plus R Movie Podcast. Today we are going to be doing another double feature, a Saturday Night Fever and its sequel, Staying Alive. First of all, we're going to cover Saturday Night Fever. It's set in the 70s in Brooklyn, specifically in like the Italian-American community, and we follow Tony Manero and his friends and family as well, who are basically all these young men. They spend a lot of time just doing their thing and then going out to the club on Saturday night and just dancing and having fun. But we kind of get into like the drama surrounding these people, especially Tony himself, certain family drama, one romance that he's having, and a lot of like very rough, very like heavy experiences that go on with his friends and with him.
It was not the film that I thought it was going to be going into it. All I really knew about Saturday Night Fever going into it was that it had John Travolta in it. He looked like it was going to go to a disco, so I thought it would be something along the lines of fucking Footloose, you know. So I thought it would be more through dance, come into himself and come of age and things like that. And that is, oh boy, that is not what happened in this film.
I mean, it's kind of a coming of age story, but not.
It very much is. It just has nearly nothing to do with proper dance.
It's definitely a drama just with a few dancing scenes in it, and it is absolutely because of the advertising, and also partially because of like the most famous moments in the film, surprisingly, aren't the most dramatic sequences in it. They're the opening scene, even some of the bits in the club where he is dancing. But when you remove those scenes, you get an almost uncomfortably realistic look at this guy who has a lot of issues and a lot of strange relationships, and he's not really the best at dealing with these problems that come his way. And the problems that he does deal with, they're not very easy to fix.
He's got horrific family issues. His friendships are ridiculously broken.
And he doesn't have the best attitudes towards women either.
An awful attitude towards women.
What the film kind of does is that it takes him on this sort of journey that does challenge him and throw a lot of stuff his way and cause him to actually go through an arc of change, but even that's sort of left a bit ambiguous.
Well, it certainly makes him look at himself more honestly. Whether he changes or not, again, at least as this film has said, it looks ambiguous. But it's very much a film about a guy who grew up in the rough part of town with a frankly awful family life, trying to make something better of himself, but still being around the same influences that made him who he was.
All of that is kind of helped as well by the fact that the film, the way it's shot, it's an area that on the one hand looks kind of appealing, yet also so like dirty and grim as well.
I think that's the aesthetic of New York in film generally.
I think it's absolutely New York in the 70s, definitely.
It's not quite Hell's Kitchen, but it feels like it's not a million miles away from it.
Also have you kind of like low-life behavior that you see be depicted in the film. Like, you know, again, particularly with his friends, this kind of subplot where one of them gets attacked and sent to the hospital, and they spend their time wanting to get revenge on the people who did it, and they end up attacking this group of like Hispanic men, drive the car into their hideout and just attack them. It's not too far away from just being a straight up crime movie, or certainly breaking the law. They go back to Gus, you know, the guy who's in hospital, and he says, well, I mean, I just said probably it was those guys, you know, it might not have been. Terrible action that didn't even really have much of a point to it.
Nasty young men, his friends. You get it quite early from the start. Immediately drink driving, which immediately sets a great tone for them. You kind of know they're going to be a little bit of trouble. As it goes through, there's worse and worse stuff. Their attitudes towards women are awful as a group. And then I feel like Tony almost jumps into that attitude even more.
He has it, and some of that is influence and some of that is independent. Stephanie is the person who actually challenges his male ego, challenges this whole thing of like, oh, I'm so cool, I'm so like, you know, confident, I have these people who love me. She has a job working like a secretary or something, and she ends up seeing a lot of like famous people, and even her job just generally is on the upper echelon. Tony's very low compared to her. Tony just works at a paint store, whereas she's actually working in a pretty respectable field, and she does have that intelligence and vivaciousness, and she's able to put him down. It explains that he's really not that smart, but even then you do get the sense that she is judging him.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time though, like as much as she is judging him, she's still, for the most part, she's typically on the right side, and Tony is typically on the wrong side.
She almost functions as a sage archetype in this film.
Absolutely, yeah. We're really seeing that sort of clash that's going on, but also that romance. In some ways, the clashing is what attracts him to her.
Tony is a very mixed character. There's nothing that really kind of sells that more than the sequence where he, on the one hand, gives the prize money to the Puerto Rican dancers because he thinks, oh, you guys are better. And then won't take no for an answer in the car, with Stephanie later on. Like, you're just there, like, the film doesn't make him out to be, I mean, he tried to rape a woman, that makes you a bad guy.
Yeah.
It does. It's almost like a bad person trying not to be.
Like when he tried to do that, I did lose a lot of sympathy for him. But that is slightly, I don't know if it's made up for, but it is mitigated by the scenes that happen directly afterward. They're definitely the point where his friends totally crossed the line, where they rape Annette, the one who had a lot of interest in Tony and had some interest in the friends as well. But they just end up basically just raping her, and it's cutting to him, and he doesn't exactly look like he's getting anything out of it. He looks pretty disturbed, and even the bit of slut shaming that he does afterwards, it seems almost like it's something done because he doesn't really know how to deal with it. It's basically a series of terrible events happening that he doesn't really know how to deal with. So he ends up acting like a dickhead in that sequence. And then it's followed by Bobby's suicide. That's another terrible thing that's happening. So all of these like terrible things happen. It sets up the ending where he actually goes to Stephanie's house and he seems kind of apologetic and he seems almost like maybe he wants to actually start being a decent person. It's a lot of stuff happening, and there's not really a clear answer at the end of the day.
It's good that there isn't a clear answer.
It's sort of like, okay, this guy could change, but I mean, maybe he won't. Like, it's sort of left up to you to wonder what could happen.
The film doesn't really judge its characters, which kind of makes it a lot more uncomfortable as a watch, because it's something. Obviously, we have slightly different perspectives on Tony, I think, and I think Tony's a prick.
Oh, I think he's a prick too. I just think that like he's
I don't think there's very much redeemable about him at all. I don't see that follow-up scene of mitigating it at all, because he's uncomfortable. He still lets his friends rape her though, doesn't he?
He's not doing what he should be doing, which is stopping it. But all I'm just saying is, like, despite what he's done, he's not really on the same level as his friends. But I agree, he's not doing the right thing either. I think you can certainly put the label on him of being a bad person. There's some good.
I'd say there's depth to the character, and he's interesting to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's somewhat a sense of altruism to it at points. At the same time, he does such horrible, horrible things.
What's noteworthy about the direction as well is that it kind of almost emphasizes that, again, that ego that he has, confidence that is kind of charming, but also very, very almost repellent. To give you an example, there's a lot of shots early on that are pointed upwards at him that almost make him look like a giant. This isn't really the film saying how cool this guy is. It's more saying this is how Tony views himself.
In the opening interaction with his dad and with the whole mirror scene, like, he's obsessed with his reflection the entire time. He's very, very focused on combing his hair, making that right. His response to being cooked for dinner is, "Oh, I don't want to get any on my shirt. It's my good shirt." Primary goal is clearly himself and his look and his image.
You even see that in like brief small scenes, like in the bit where Connie comes up to him and he's clearly interested in like bedding him, and he decides, "I'll dance with you," and then he dances with her for like maybe 20 seconds or whatever, and then he's as good in bed as you are on the dance floor, then you're one lousy fuck, and then just heads off to do that one single dance. That is really impressive, but that's kind of a sign, isn't it?
Tony works as a very complicated character, and I think, I wouldn't say you exactly root for him, but I think he's a good vehicle to see the film through. Rise high of arrogance, you get that kind of 70s vibe of absolute confidence, dancing and look and image, and then you get to see that get repeatedly crushed.
Like you have that running storyline of kind of almost a contrast of Bobby, the most sympathetic of his friends.
Not as involved as the others seem to be. And then built up to this kind of, Bobby didn't tend to do stunts, he didn't tend to do much of the drinking or any of that the other guys did. And then when he does do it, probably the purest member of the gang, which is, to be fair, not difficult to be.
He has his own problem and he's clearly trying to like find help. And the problem is that he's in a group and he's in a position where nobody will give him that help that he needs. Like basically all he needs somebody to allow his girlfriend to get an abortion because his girlfriend is pregnant, and he's saying like, "Oh, everybody in my life is telling me to marry her." Then as a result, at the end is partially why he like ends up killing himself, and also because of some of the terrible things that he's witnessed, and also because his friends just weren't there for him and weren't helping him. And that kind of also ties into this other like subplot in the film, like Tony's brother, his older brother Frank, who was a former priest that then left the priesthood. And what we see with him is that we're kind of seeing an example of a guy who was clearly boxed into doing something by his parents, but he is gaining a bit of independence, but it's also not particularly fulfilling either, because we don't know what the hell he's doing. It almost seems like he doesn't have anything else to do, and he's like, even in that club scene, Bobby still calls him like father and stuff. Even a couple of the other friends call him father, even though he's no longer a priest.
We see him as this one thing, and even when he becomes the black sheep, he's still meant to be, "Oh, you are the priest." That's your function.
Bit of a contrast between Tony Manero's family and the world of like the club scene and his friends. And when you've kind of got that contrast, you also see that contrast between him and Tony as well, because Tony does have a bit of independence, but he's also using it to lead a very unfulfilling life and be a prick as well. John Travolta is really great in this movie, and I think the reason why he's really good is because he kind of manages to sell this like range of emotion. He can effortlessly go from being cool to being a horrible person to being charismatic to being sympathetic, you know.
Frightened kid.
There's a dinner table argument about Frank leaving. It gets quite rough, and he just yells at his mother, and his mother cries, and he clearly regrets doing it. He's clearly upset as well, and we see that. And then in the very next scene, when like he's kind of blowing off Annette, and Annette is kind of sad, he's just being a joke. Oh God, my mother and now you. Both those scenes kind of cover, again, a range of emotions, and I think he sells it really well.
But even smaller scenes, like they get a lot of dynamics, like that opening dinner bit where he's sort of adapted to what is a actually quite an abusive family, to be honest. He's dealing with that. He gets this moment of tenderness with his sister while his relationship with his parents is clearly strained. You get that anger kind of like come out, like especially at the table when he's shouting at people, but then you also get the softer and more tender sides. You get immediately there kind of what the crux of his character is. It's this conflict of guys pushing different ways, and as situations get more extreme, he gets more extreme. The film really does challenge him as a character, which then makes it compelling to watch. It's not exactly a moral ending. It's not exactly a good one, but it's cathartic in a way that Tony seems to see how Brooklyn is.
I think the film was very well written. There's a lot of genuine drama and pathos to the characters and to the situations that they're in. Obviously, that Staying Alive scene opening is totally iconic and famous, and you can definitely see why, because out of context, it's such a good match of music and imagery, and it's so striking and cool and confident. But when you actually analyze that scene on a writing level, it's a good introduction to his character, or at least to the bad side of his character, because when you actually think about it, he was working at the time. He was ordered to go and fetch a bucket of paint and come back. And yeah, he's walking like he has all the time in the world. He's stopping to get pizza. He's stopping to like do something with money. He's got this like responsibility, and yet he's kind of just blowing it off.
When he's challenged on that, when he gets back, he's aggressive about it.
Yeah, and the job stuff comes back as well. He seems to value his job because it's a support for him. You have the dynamic between him and his boss. His boss gives him a raise. He's all like, I'm only giving you like $2.45. But Tony is very happy about that. And you see obviously the bit where Tony gets fired when he asks just have the afternoon off. And then he gets hired back. And that's kind of a breaking point for Tony, because he looks at these two older people, and then the bosses are like, oh yeah, these guys have been working for me for like 18 years. And that is also kind of a challenge and a realization for him. I want to be stuck at this paint store for like most of my life. I want to do something. I want to do something cool.
It kind of is the image slamming into the reality of the situation. And I think that's a lot of what Saturday Night Fever is. It's stripping away the glamour. It's almost like an attack on 70s culture, to be honest. It's
a showcase of that realism in this area at that point in time. There's also both a sort of glamorization, but also a deconstruction of that whole disco dance culture as well, and culture that existed at the time around disco, which made it so popular. Behind the scenes of that, here were these empty, very like kind of bad people, that like, yeah, they might look cool dancing, but in reality, here's their lives out of the nightclub.
Here's their life, and here's some of the stuff they actually do. And it's like, Jesus.
Like, again, there is an element of celebration to it, especially in the soundtrack. I totally love disco music, and this movie is definitely a showcase of some of the best hits of the era. I think the soundtrack is used very, very well in the film.
Like you said, the opening is a really good bit of song, especially because I've been watching a lot of more generic action recently, where they put a pop song over a group of people fighting to make them seem cool when they don't have a decent score or a good sound design.
See that, yeah.
A film that was using good music was actually really, really nice, and using it well.
And a lot of it is certainly a diegetic part of the scene.
What was your favourite use of music in the film? Mine probably is that opening, to be honest.
Like practice scene, like the bits where Tony is practicing, like Stephanie and stuff. When he's dancing to More Than a Woman, the use of music there I thought was really good. The bit where Tony's dancing to that song, You Should Be Dancing, the music is literally commenting on what's going on. But in that sequence as well, it's like, you can't imagine that scene without the music. The music just goes perfectly. And it also perfectly, on like spiritual level as well, again, conveys that total confidence, that total belief in yourself that is, again, challenged throughout the film. Just like in that one scene, the movie is kind of letting itself be a bit show-offy. It's a really good movie. It's very raw. it's got a lot of dark, heavy sequences in it. So I think like that's something that you should probably be prepared for if you're going to watch it.
It's not like a straight up dance film the same way Dirty Dancing is.
To like Grease, which also has like John Travolta in it, which, you know, like I've seen Grease, and Grease isn't full of musical numbers, but Grease is still a musical just with some drama in it. But this is very much just a drama with, like, again, as I said before, a drama with like dance scene. Definitely a time capsule of like 70s culture, but it's also, you know, again, a showcase of realism, definitely.
Yeah, I think it is an injection of a healthy dose of realism into that disco world, and I think it is definitely worth a watch.
Let's move on to Staying Alive. Yeah, sum up the plot of this one. It takes place years after the first one in like 1983, I think.
Yeah, it's like 6 years after the first one.
And he's living in like upstate New York, I think, and he's basically training to become a Broadway dancer. He gets into a couple of romances, and that's kind of all this movie is.
Yeah, it's a follow-up with some dances, and it feels like he learns most of the same lessons he did the first time, without the really morally uncomfortable stuff that actually makes that work.
I thought this was fucking awful. Respect to the sequel to Saturday Night Fever does seem totally unnecessary, but I do think that this movie could have worked. It could have actually taken his character on an interesting journey. I do think it could have.
It could have shown him developing into a man and getting, you know, exposed to the world of actual professional dancing, and kind of see whether he's going to actually commit to being that newer person he seemed to try to want to be at the end of Saturday Night Fever.
The prospect of it being lighter, I don't really have a problem with that either, because after everything that you went through in the first one, I feel like a bit of a lighter tone would be welcome. But the big problem with this movie is that it's all flash and no substance. It's basically just a series of dance sequences and romance sequences, and that's it. No drama, really. There is kind of drama, but it's very much like,
it's almost like a rom-com drama, but trying to do dramatically, which doesn't work.
Almost like CW teen drama, but it just aged up a little bit.
I can see that.
It's just so shallow, you know. It's just sort of like, oh hey, I like this one girl, and there's this other girl who's a dancer that I'm interested in, and we're gonna have a fling, and oh man, she doesn't like me. Now I'm really mad, and then I'm just gonna get with this other girl who kind of like more and stuff, and kind of all it amounts to. And I think the issue with the film is that this movie just so lacks what made the first film good. The only thing I feel like they took away from the first film is just John Travolta. He does a lot of dancing.
He's got a strange relationship with women. Let's go.
And the film does have a couple of callbacks to the first one. There's one scene where he goes back to his house and sees his mother again. One scene where he's in a club as like a waiter. The film itself is so kind of disconnected that really it could have just been its own thing. Probably would have been a bit better.
Yeah, because then it wouldn't have had the comparison. Even visually, it just doesn't have the same sort of buff style that the first one had.
It's not shot terribly. The problem with the movie is, I think, the direction, because it's directed by Sylvester Stallone, which is kind of a weird thing in and of itself. But I think that Stallone can certainly be a good director. On one hand, he did Rocky 2. On the other hand, he's doing those very like cheesy Rocky 3 and 4. He could have done the gritty one, or he could have done maybe a bit of a cheesy sequel. But with this movie, his direction doesn't really work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because the film feels directionless. It doesn't really feel like there's a lot happening. We don't really know where it's going throughout most of it.
Almost rehashing the first one without properly doing it, while also trying to be its own thing, but not actually having anything particularly to say. And I don't feel like he particularly changes at the end of the film.
I feel like his character's kind of regressed, because this is supposed to be like him several years later, being kind of older and wise. Still doesn't have the best attitudes towards women, and he's even a two-timer, which he wasn't in the first one. Has a relationship, and then he kind of cheats on his current girlfriend, and then he shows interest in his girlfriend, and then he shows interest in the British dancer that he's in love with. He doesn't really go on an arc, or really an arc of change beyond just, okay, I'm not picking this girl, I'm picking this girl instead. And they kind of, in certain select scenes, try to bring it to some sort of character drama. The dance choreography has a couple of scenes where Tony, don't think like the audience, dance for you, don't dance for them. Even at the end of it, where he kind of does this bit of improvisation, they're adding stuff, but the film isn't really about that. So those moments just don't land.
Character drama needs to be in every scene, at least. There's got to be something pushing your character forward towards their arc.
It's just weighed down by the fact that this movie contains endless endless dancing scenes of him, extras, even a couple of scenes with like him and his girlfriend, scenes of his girlfriend singing in a club, montages. I think if you cut all that stuff out, you wouldn't even have a feature-length movie. That stuff really weighs down. It was almost like the film wants to be a musical. So as a result, you have a lot of scenes that aren't really moving the story forward, and are just sort of like indulging in being like, look how cool this dancing is. Look how well trained Travolta is. Look how well trained these like extras are. It results in a film that I honestly found very boring. It's the dancing gets repetitive.
Nothing of note particularly happens. If you've seen the first one, there's no reason to watch this one at all. I mean, it's fair. I wouldn't say there's much of a reason to watch it anyway. But if you've seen the first one, there's definitely not a reason to watch it because you've watched a better version of it already.
All the film really just has going for it is just a lot of cool dancing scenes, but even those again get very old and very tiresome. I think the film only really comes to life at the end when they actually have the performance. And even then that's more just on the level of, wow, that looks like the cool, weird, interpretive stage play that you would go and see and be like, what the hell was that? It's not a great combination of events. It's just, okay, we're reaching the point where they finally do a performance. And
we're gonna have at least somewhat of an exciting sequence. I'll give it credit. It does wrap up the relationships, you know, there seems to be a little bit of togetherness there at the end, but I didn't care about the relationship, so I don't care.
And it's not that great, but the romance stuff is like nothing when you compare it to the first one. You know, it's very trite, it's very tired. It's just sort of going through the motions of a very standard romance relationship that you'd see in just any movie. It has a few other problems as well. Like, to give you an example, Travolta in this movie is nowhere near as good as he was in Saturday Night Fever. I actually thought he kind of looked bored.
Very much phoning it in.
He doesn't have that same energy. He doesn't have that same charisma that he had. I mean, it's also the material because he just doesn't really get a scene where he can like really act. Sort of has these like very like kind of boring scenes, but he does look visibly bored in the film. Like the only thing that he did definitely put effort into is the dancing, and you know he is in amazing shape in this film, and his dancing is really good. So that stuff I'm sure he was like totally there for. But anytime it's like a dialogue scene, he just looks, I'm just getting this over with.
Yeah, it's almost like he read the script and went, "Can I get out of it? No, fuck."
It's also not helped as well by the fact that there's 50 close-ups of him just staring blankly at people. Those instances, especially, you can see the just, I don't really care. I'm just here just because I have to be. There's so little to say about this movie. It's so like minor and almost irrelevant that it doesn't tarnish the first movie at all.
No, it doesn't, because the first film could still stand on its own completely. They're very separate, actually.
And even sort of almost tries to go for the element of a wrap up, you know, like at the end of the movie, with that deliberate callback to the opening scene of the first one, even with the fact that they just straight up play Staying Alive, trying to go for this element of like, now finally Tony has achieved something that he's always wanted to achieve, but it feels more like, all right, okay, he did a good job in that one Broadway show, but does that mean that he's going to live a life of success? Does that mean that he's now become the best version of himself that he can be? The film is trying to go for that callback, but it just hasn't really earned it on a story level.
I don't know what that means for him at all. Does he have more in the show that he's got to do? I think it is meant to be him reaffirming himself, going to be a dancer, but that's been his default throughout the film anyway. So, like, it doesn't feel like anything's happened.
And also, given how he's not with, like, Stephanie in this movie, it's sort of like, okay, well, that relationship that he's in might not last. It's supposed to be conclusive, but it's very inconclusive. The film definitely has a big missed opportunity in regards to taking the same approach to disco in the club scene, same approach from Saturday Night Fever, and applying it to the Broadway dance scene. Because I do feel like there is certainly stuff that you can show. On occasion, it maybe has a couple of bits that are showing that it's hard and kind of competitive, but again, it's very, very shallow. It's very surface level. The only other thing I just want to say as well is that the problem I have with this one compared to the first one is that in the first one, Tony's attitudes were very much challenged, whereas in this one, he's kind of just seen as being in the right the whole time.
Yeah, which is wrong for the character.
Anytime he kind of behaves like a prick, the film never really... He does on some level, because it's sort of like, okay, well, he shouldn't be in this loveless relationship compared to this other girl who actually does like him. But in his attitude towards the British dancer woman, I can't remember her name, he has this slut-shamey attitude that he did have in the first one. But in the first one, that was more called out on, whereas in this case, it's not really, because it's implied that this dancer is kind of just sleeps with men just because. And when they have Tony judge her for it, they don't call him out on it.
It makes him a much less interesting character to watch, and it makes him a lot more actively hateable in the film than he was in the first one, even though in the first one he did way more hateable shit.
Yeah, overall, I really do not recommend Staying Alive. It's boring. It doesn't have any really any of what made the first film work. The most you could get out of it is just watch select clips of certain dance scenes, or maybe, I don't know, if you just watch like the climax of it out of context, it would seem fun, but trust me, it gets very old all throughout. Very, very poor, lame sequel, I feel.
Saturday Night Fever, we would recommend. Staying Alive, we definitely wouldn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it as a double feature or anything. Because, yeah, Staying Alive is 90 something minutes, but it just feels so long. And it's so boring. It's just not really an entertaining movie at the end of the day. And that's like something that I could have forgiven it for. I'll be honest, I would have even forgiven it like totally jumping the shark and just doing something totally crazy and far removed from reality. But the film doesn't even do that, so I can't really recommend it on that basis alone.
It's not like a so bad it's good film. It's not like a ridiculous one. It's just bad.
It's got some camp in it, but like if you want something like that done by Sylvester Stallone, watch Rocky 4. Watch that if you want. This is just kind of boring. A plot about Tony Manero having to fight the mob or trying to solve a series of murders, or even like just a straight up action movie about him having to fight off people.
I'd much rather watch a movie about him developing dance fu. That's the dumbest thing that I could think of. I'd still rather watch that than Staying Alive.
Next episode, we will be discussing, as a bit of a return to like the action, more kind of the action genre, The Accountant, Ben Affleck thriller from 2016.